first. You need to educate the people on why space matters. Once they're educated, hopefully they'll be interested to learn more. Once they're interested, they'll want to experience it themselves. They'll want to buy. Only then can you have economies of scale. When we sold the first space ticket, I was like, this is a fluke.
Welcome everybody to Today in Space. We are living in a post-Blue Origin rage world, and we're going to be talking about space tourism because if you couldn't hear it from my voice in the last episode where we covered this, we have so much work to do as a space community in educating the public. We've been living in a bubble for so long, and it's awesome that it's grown this far, but there's so much education that needs to happen. Not to mention all the ignorance that's coming over online. I've been troll hunting online. Believe me, it's been crazy, and we're going to air it all out here. But we wanted to talk about space tourism. We wanted to actually educate, including vent, but just actually talk about what's out there. This week, for People of Space, we have Roman. Welcome to the podcast. Please introduce yourself, and let's just dive into this.
Alex, thanks for having me. My name is Roman Chiporukha. I am the co-founder and CEO of SpaceVIP, which is a space tourism company, and the chair of the board of the Space Prize Foundation, which is a nonprofit created to promote universal space literacy and women in STEM education. And yes, preach on, brother. Where do you want to start? I mean, we could start with the hate. We can start with the positive. You tell me.
We'll dig into the hate. We'll have plenty of time for the hate. Let's start with just some basics, right? Let's talk about you, because that's how I usually talk about this. Let's start with the person, right?
So, my favorite topic.
Yeah. Tell me about kind of what you're doing with SpaceVIP. What got you into space tourism? Maybe we can talk about what space tourism actually is after that, but let's just dig into you and how you got here doing what you're doing.
Easy. So I own and operate a successful lifestyle management company where we cater to the world's ultra well-heeled in all matters of lifestyle and leisure. And because of my client base, I was approached by Axiom Space in 2018, and they said, hey, we hear you work with some of the world's wealthiest. Help us promote the first all-private astronaut mission to the International Space Station. And that was AX-1. We happily obliged. It took me 2 years, and
that was what, 2021?
That was they first reached out in like mid 2018.
Oh wow!
And we started working together. And in 2020, we successfully introduced them to the third and final astronaut for AX-1, thereby making the mission possible. And as a result of that, we started SpaceVIP in order to aggregate all of the space tourism operators in one place. Because what we learned in that short time period is that there wasn't one place where you can go to learn about all of these space tourism experiences. Because if you went to Axiom or you went to Blue Origin or Virgin, you know, you kind of read these notions of the dawn of humanity. And I'm not very smart, and I needed to answer 5 questions like, what the fuck is it? How much does it cost? Where do you train? How long does that take? And what do I tell my wife? So we created a very easy, digestible approach to all opportunities on Earth, in the world's ocean, which we deem to be space adjacent, because a lot of astronauts, as everybody knows, train in the water, and in actual space. So if you go to spacevip.com, you'll see all of these different experiences. You could live in saturation, you can try stratospheric balloons, you can go hang out at NASTAR, and then you can go to low Earth orbit, etc. So that was kind of our entry point, selling that $50 million ticket, starting SpaceVIP. And as we were building SpaceVIP, we were educating ourselves on everything space related, and realized 2 really important things. One, the general public has no fucking idea that at least 50% of the technological innovation that we take for granted today
Mm,
actually comes from space technology. And two, that women are generally underserved in the STEM and aerospace community. So, with the help of one of my clients on the lifestyle and leisure side, we started a nonprofit called the Space Prize Foundation, which hosts writing contests around the world, specifically focused on junior high school and high school women.
mm,
And the winners get to go on a zero gravity flight. We send them
cool.
to space camp. We donate telescopes to the schools and other ancillary awards. We've done this successfully in New York City, choosing one school from
Mm,
each borough. We've done this
nice.
in Paris, where we gave out the award during the International Aeronautical Congress. That was a couple of years back. We did this in partnership with Mario Ferreira, who was Portugal's first private astronaut, having gone with Blue Origin, I think, about a year ago. And so we sent 30 girls on a zero gravity flight, and we were like, this is cool, but it doesn't create enough impact. So then we went out, spent even more money, and wrote the first open source space curriculum geared specifically towards young people. And that curriculum is now being shared worldwide. We've partnered with UNESCO to proliferate that curriculum in East
Mm,
Africa and started in Rwanda. So that's been going really well. We're getting about a million hits on the curriculum, and it's being really well received. But
mm,
it's not enough. So for full
mm,
transparency, I didn't grow up with a passion for space or desire to go to space camp.
sure.
My only touch points were passing by the Yuri Gagarin statue in my native Moscow.
Mm,
Um, and so I think the opportunity to sell a space ticket was like a gift from the universe to say, this is what your trajectory should be, and this is
mm,
what you should focus on. And now being in this business for the last 7 years, remember we started in 2018. I do think and firmly believe that space has the potential to be a catalyst for greater human change. And I know that may sound idealistic, but we kind of need to stop being assholes to one another and realize that we are we are brothers and sisters, as lame as that sounds,
mm.
and we are floating on the same rock through space. So maybe we should not fight $1 trillion wars over imaginary borders. And these are things that are only evident when you're looking at the Earth from space and you're experiencing that overview effect. So
Mm.
that's a little bit about me, the genesis, how we got here, and what we're trying to achieve.
I love it. I thank you for that. I think we relate on a lot of things there. Seeing space as a catalyst for hope and peace, and just unification of humanity for a common goal. I mean, we lack that so much in today's world. And we have for a while. It's just the differences between people just keep adding up, or
We
at least
came
that's what we
together for
focus on.
like we came together for like 5 minutes during COVID. Remember when
Yep.
COVID just happened?
Yep.
Everyone was like, "We have a common enemy to fight." And then we
Mm-hmm.
were like, actually, you can't come into my country without these specifics and
Oh
stay in
yeah.
your country. And then the
Neighbors,
different,
family. Yeah. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and the differences were bold and underlined.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do believe I am optimistic in that way that space can be so profound, just like it was during the first space race,
Right.
um, that it can really change it. And something that in the last year or two that I started focusing on because when I went to school for aerospace engineering, I wasn't growing up in a space family. I didn't have a lot of robotics programs in my towns. I
Right.
was, as far as like where I started into going to school for aerospace, I was very low on the rung of experience. And the podcast has been a place for me to experience space for the first time in so many different ways.
Cool.
So as I was going back into space history and learning more about the first space race, I realized that the space conundrum, basically that there's progress in space, and then there's also progress in society, but more chaos in society, which is almost like the primer for progress. And so like why do those two things happen? And we started seeing a lot of space progress with the new space race the last 8, 10 years, and all the chaos in society came along with it. And so this Blue Origin flight, NS-31, the all-female flight to the edge of space, just tapped right into that space conundrum, and it was the
Threw some petrol
perfect.
on it.
Oh, it's the perfect powder keg for just people's hate and class issues and the economy and civil rights, like all of these things, even though it's very different than the first one, it has all the same ingredients of the last one. So um it was very shocking to see it turn so quickly when that happened. I mean, when it happened, nobody was really talking about it. And then all of a sudden it just started like taking off on its own and tapped into so much of what people are dealing with in today's world, or just treating how they treat other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Listen, it was there are a couple of different points to address here. The first point is that the haters are always going to hate. So good luck, haters, if you're listening, enjoy your petty hatred. My problem with haters is that they subscribe to what I consider a single perspective narrative.
Mm,
If I make you the bad guy, I no longer ask any questions or look for any solutions. That's the biggest problem of a hater. It's easy to say, he's rich, he's an asshole, he went to space, what's the purpose?
mm,
They are not entirely wrong with components of their hatred,
hmm.
because I think Blue Origin could have done a much better job in
Oh,
preparing uh, the women. There could have been a pre,
preach.
during, and post, but that's been their MO from the beginning, you know.
And they tend to use from my perspective, being deep following all the space industry, the the way that Blue Origin approaches space compared to NASA and SpaceX, which are really the other two big companies doing that at scale, like they're very closed off. They don't share much of their progress. You only
Right.
hear about the flight maybe the day of. And then they do use celebrity. They do use hype. And that mixed with how people feel today was just, it just took off.
Listen, celebrity is important, because me telling the general public that they're too fucking stupid for not realizing that most of these things that they take for granted, like GPS or their Uber delivery
Mm-hmm.
or how to get to their mom's house, actually comes from space, is not going to move the dial.
Mm,
Katy Perry saying, "Did you know that GPS comes from space?" will be deeply impactful. But nobody took the time to create that narrative.
yeah.
And that's why you have all of this negative rhetoric. I know Aisha personally. She's
Mm,
done several speaking engagements for the Space Prize Foundation.
nice.
Her story is not a billionaire asshole joyride story.
Nope.
She is a NASA rocket scientist. She earned that all by herself. Nobody
Yeah.
helped her. She had to claw and dig to make it happen. She's a woman of color. So kudos to her and the other participants who are not celebrities.
Mm,
And people need to consider that for a moment. I know it's easy to hate on Katy Perry because she's trying to put the ass back into Astronaut, which is mildly amusing. Like you gotta give it to her. So listen, that's further to this notion that the narrative needs to be much more developed. Look at 2022 when we had the first suborbital flights with
mm,
Branson and Blue Origin again.
yep.
They went up, instead of saying thank you so much for your billions of private money, NASA said, you didn't go high enough, you
Mm,
can't get astronaut wings. And I was like, are these people serious? Give them like a feather, give them half a wing,
mm,
say thank you. So the narrative issue is consistent. And yes, it wasn't developed in this particular case, but I think the haters are wrong, holistically speaking, because we don't, unfortunately, can't measure the impact that this has created. I know for sure that there are millions of women out there who looked at this and didn't say, oh, well, she got to go because she's rich. No, they saw an Asian woman, they saw a Black woman go up to space and experience zero gravity, and thought to themselves, I can do that. I know, because we talk by virtue of our Space Prize Foundation to all of the high schools that were the recipients, and they were deeply impacted by this. But can you imagine how much more it would have been if there was a carefully crafted storyline? And
Mm.
unfortunately, when you're dealing with one of the wealthiest people in the world, like, I'm sure Bezos' PR company can be like, dude, William Shatner's crying over there. Don't be spraying champagne all over the place, or thanking the Amazon workers. So
Yeah.
I think that could be um, adjusted a bit more thoughtfully to serve the purpose. But,
Yeah.
and to your point, maybe they don't give a fuck. Maybe there is no story to
Yeah.
tell. They don't care about the negative rhetoric. He sent Lauren Sanchez up there. She went with a couple of women, and they achieved what they set out to achieve, because you don't know what their prices are, because they operate,
Yep.
by their own rubric. So maybe it's irrelevant. I think you and I and people who are deeply supportive of the community and education would want to see a bit more, and are desperately calling out for it. Uh,
Mm.
like, I would have saved one seat for a girl who won the space prize and done a global space prize. And that would have catalyzed women all over the
Yeah.
world to participate in this. Yes, it would have been a bit more organizing, but the far reaching effects would be felt for generations, not for years, but
Yeah.
generations.
Yeah. And there's historical context for all of this, right? So going back to the first space race, when it was, Whitey on the Moon was a famous poem that was released back then, and that was, civil rights angle, and that, all these rich white men were spending all this money to go to the moon while people on Earth are dealing with hell at that time, and economically and with their rights. And NASA had protesters at the time of the space program, and kudos to them. They actually met with them, they talked with them, they heard what they were saying, and then they made symbolic gestures. There could be an argument made that they could have done more,
Right.
absolutely,
You
but
could always do more,
but
right?
there
You could
was the
always,
symbolism
right,
of it all,
of
that
inclusion.
yeah, and they brought some of the poorest people with the least amount of opportunity to those space launches, and they were able to experience something they never would have had access to. And that simple gesture made a huge difference in what the space program meant. And I think at the core of what some of the people that were upset with this is at face value, which, like to your point, there wasn't enough done to explain all the things that Blue Origin does do
Right.
already. It like that has to be on repeat, because that's more important than the celebrity and hype of getting the next funding round,
Right.
you know?
It's interesting that you make this point, because I remember, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, Bezos donates $1 billion towards space education.
Hmm.
And the Washington Post, that he owns,
Hmm.
only writes about it on like the 19th page in small fonts somewhere, so that it's buried deep beneath. Like,
Hmm.
he gets a lot of shit, and some of it I'm sure is deserved, but he also does a lot for the community. Look at Jared Isaacman, for example. People
Hmm.
only started hearing his name when he was appointed, the space secretary, or whatever his current title is. But that guy's a fucking legend.
Oh
He
yeah.
raised $250 million for St. Jude's cancer awareness. He
Hmm.
promoted the shit out of his own company by doing this marketing campaign. You can only
Yep.
participate if you're, a client of Shift4. And he
Hmm.
became an intrepid explorer. And they did a Netflix series about him.
Hmm.
And if you walk out on the street and ask 1,000 people, maybe one person will know his name.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what, what I mean, and he has
Well,
means.
and to Jared Isaacman's credit, because I think he dealt with this better than Blue Origin has. Not only was it the shift poor, like that was one of the entrants that you could have for that. It was also donating to St. Jude,
Yep.
right? And you could get a space patch to donate. And there was just
And a poster. and
and
a
a
hat.
poster.
I got all of that.
100%. And they always were stating the amount of money that they were donating after, that for this, what they were able to come together. Like, and then having Haley Arsenault on there, who's a cancer survivor at
Right.
St. Jude's, like all of those things are beautiful. And as I said in the last episode where we talked about this, like Blue Origin has done a lot for the space, um, for correcting some of the wrongs in the space history, right?
Right.
Or adding to the legacy of it. Um,
Why not advertise that and
why
talk about
not
right,
advertise that?
right.
Exactly. I
No,
agree
it's
with you.
really it's really a shame. And but here we are.
Yes.
So, I hope we can build on that. And I I posted something on LinkedIn saying, yes, great. Talk all the shit that you want. And who was it? Megan Kelly said, "I'm not impacted." Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not impacted, Megan, because you live in a $20 million apartment. Of course, you're
Hmm.
not impacted. But hopefully, the girl who's herding sheep at the foothills of the Atlas Mountains and thinking that her life is only making wool sweaters out of that sheep can now look at this and say, you know what? I've always liked math. Maybe I can have a go at this. That's the point. That's the activator. And I said something like, this isn't a launch, it's a spark. And I truly believe that we need more of these experiences, but crafted in a proper way, which is in part why when we got into the stratospheric balloon game,
Mm.
we bought a bunch of them from several different operators. And yes, I have clients who are willing to pay me full deposits for a seat on it. I said, okay, that's great. We have several capsules. We can sell some of them out of
Mm.
inventory. But more importantly, let's use this platform to tell a story.
Yes.
And that story is why space matters, which is why we
Mm.
partnered with Rasmus Monk, the #8 restaurant in the world,
Mm.
to cook a meal at the edge of space. That's not to sell
Mm.
$500,000 tickets. Like, I'm breaking even. I'm probably at a loss at
Right.
those costs. And of
Mm.
course, the haters are like, oh, because we need more rich assholes having Michelin meals in space. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is that Rasmus cooks with a social impact message. He
Mm.
serves you fish with edible plastic to showcase how we're polluting the world's ocean. So him cooking a
Mm.
meal at the edge of space tells a meaningful story
Mm.
about where we came from, where we're going, how we should treat each other, the planet, all of these things. And I'm not sitting here, strumming my guitar, singing Kumbaya and say, let's, love one another and be brothers and sisters. I mean, yes, we should do that too, but let's be realistic as well. We're talking to really well-known artists who can use the stratospheric balloon as their canvas to
Mm.
share the message. Because again,
Sure.
somebody like me who's no one ever heard of, telling them that they don't know this is not going to change anything.
Mm.
But as I said, if Jay-Z and Beyonce or Yo-Yo Ma goes on the capsule and says, hey, did you know, that'll create meaningful impact.
Mm.
And there's a lot of people who just, I think the celebrities are like, oh, I love space. It's so cool. More women in STEM. But like, it's kind of like the protests that I see for various political reasons. People protest, but they don't actually like do anything.
Mm.
So if you love space so much, why don't you tell your agent that you want to go to space and that it's really meaningful and that you'll allocate some of your own dollars? Because
Mm.
a lot of the things that I hear is, I'm interested, talk to my agent. And the agent is like, how much?
Right.
And I'm like, dude, I'll pay you the fucking money. Is your client genuinely interested? That's the reason that we
Mm.
actually got along with Rasmus so well, is that he was like, this is amazing. And we
Mm.
talked about money and figured that out only later down the road after the sincerity of the involvement was showcased.
Mm. Yeah. So your storytelling with space and
I'm
your
trying to.
oh well, that's storytelling, right? And the Blue Origin one felt like the only story that really was prepared to be promoted was that Katy Perry and Gail King went to space. Like it felt like they just weren't prepared and they had Aisha's story, they had Amanda's story ready. They had already filmed it. They weren't promoting it. And so to your point, like,
Flabbergasted.
yeah, and like in a business sense, it's also like what you're talking about is finding customers that align with what the company, like finding the customer that you can provide the most value to, right? Just getting someone on to pay for going to space, it isn't why you're doing this, correct?
Say that again.
So the like you're not doing this business just so that you can get clients and send them to space. You're looking for somebody that is going to be blown away by it, and getting them there is just the financial mechanism to help them experience this amazing thing.
Let's be realistic. I started a space company because I sold a ticket. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, there's an opportunity here. There's clearly a market. I also realized that besides 60, well, then 50, now $70 million seats and a $10,000 zero gravity flight, there's nothing to sell for
Hmm.
the foreseeable future.
Yep.
So, and why aren't people buying this? Oh, because they don't know anything about it. So
Hmm.
it's kind of like we filled the ecosystem with what we believe to be missing. So, am I
Hmm.
doing this? Because I want to be really honest
Please.
to answer your question. Like, am I doing this out of the goodness of my heart because I want people to expand their notions of who they are and how to be kind? Maybe eventually. That's not what I started out
Yeah.
as. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, there's a missing element here. Let's build a business around it. Then we realize that there's no women. People don't know enough to be interested, let alone buy. So whenever
Hmm.
I get interviewed, people are like, well, how can we create an economy of scale? I'm like, first, you need to educate the people on why space matters. Once they're educated, hopefully they'll be interested to learn more.
Hmm.
Once they're interested, they'll want to experience it themselves. They'll want to buy. And
Hmm.
then only then can you have economies of scale
Right.
because, okay, I could spend 10, you could spend $1 million. Only then can you have economies of scale
Right.
because, okay, I could spend 10, you could spend $1 million. Then we can call Elon or Bezos and say, it's not 100 people who can afford $1 million. It's 1 million people who can collectively afford $1 trillion.
Sure.
And they're like, oh, great. Okay, let's build 100 rockets instead of 10. And then the prices will eventually come down.
Hmm.
So it started as a business venture. And then when we saw these glaring, gaping holes,
Yeah.
like the female piece was very interesting because my wife is my business partner in my lifestyle and travel company. So I don't look at her as, hey, clean the house
Sure.
and stay at home.
Yeah. You're a different
Though
dynamic.
though those are also worthy jobs. I look at her as my partner in life and in business. I have a son
Mhm.
and a daughter. I think everyone should be given equal opportunities. I am an immigrant to this wonderful country. I earned everything myself.
Hmm.
So I think it's important to create opportunity and share opportunity because even as I'm walking here talking to you today, achieve the success that I have, I'm confident that I could have achieved more if I had learned about different opportunities that were out there. Not go
Hmm.
out and see. It's a combination of seeking and things being availed to you.
Sure.
Like if a speaker came into the school and said, "Hey, if you can do this," like I didn't even conceptualize that I could apply to Harvard or
Yeah.
Cornell. I applied to one school
Hmm.
because I knew nothing about the collegiate process. And by
Hmm.
the grace of God, they accepted me. And by the way, I applied as a cardiovascular surgeon. Go figure.
Ah,
So there was some, I don't know, passion for math and science.
and
Uh,
something challenging, it seems.
I guess. I
Yeah, yeah,
guess.
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess. I was like, oh my God, this seems sadomasochistic enough.
Well, no, you answered my question perfectly. When I was asking the question, it was less about like, is this like an idealistic thing for you? It's more that, was there something more than just profit? Because obviously you could have done something completely different just to make money. There's something else driving you there. And it seems like the hunt of like, can we do this? Like, can we fill this gap and in whatever way make a difference?
Well, it started as that, okay, we did this. When we sold the first space ticket, I was like, this is a fluke. And my wife was like, why don't you just celebrate your success? You
Good
clearly have
advice.
psychological
Good advice.
issues. And I'm like, no, not good enough. It's my immigrant mentality. You get a
Yeah.
99 and your parents are like, Why didn't you get 100? Are you stupid or something?
Uh-huh. I can relate.
Um, so, right, you're Greek?
Yep.
Yeah. So similar. My
Very
mom's
similar, yeah.
Russian Orthodox. It's like,
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
we've got a lot of similarities there.
Um, so you grow up with the sense of like, be better, especially as immigrants in order to survive. And so I spent the next 72 hours emailing all of the billionaires that I had originally pitched, being like,
Mm.
tickets are sold out. they're
Yeah,
going,
yeah, yeah.
they're going fast. You know,
Uh,
get in on the next one, and then it just kind of built itself into this thing because we kept at it and we were learning more, and then we got into the oceanographic stuff. And at one point, it was a couple of years ago, and my brother heard me give an interview, and I'm talking about the overview effect.
mhm,
And he's
mhm.
like, "Why are you saying all of this stuff about interconnectedness?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're a fucking asshole." And he said it. He said it not
Ah,
in this way that I'm just like this huge
it's
jerk,
like you're not being yourself.
but he was like, "Roman, you're like really self-centered. So why are you talking about this interconnectedness?" And I took that as a moment of reflection to be like, you know what? He's right. Here I'm preaching, love your fellow brother. But if you cut me off on the streets of New York City, I'm calling you every name in the book, and I may even
Oh,
like come out
and
and
we're
break your
both
car.
East Coast? Oh,
Yeah,
this is crazy. Yeah.
East Coast. Um, so I took a step back and I was like, okay, maybe I can try to be a little bit less of an asshole and try to be a bit more empathetic in order to kind of practice what I am trying to preach. Because
Mm,
if I'm like looking up and trying to be accepting of my fellow brother, then even if you do some nastiness to me, I'm still trying to understand where you're coming from. And I think we all need to do a little bit of that, because it's one thing if I'm saying it and not doing it. And I'm not standing here, or rather walking here, telling you that I'm so great and so nice to everybody. I am not. But I am trying and striving to make minor adjustments. And I think if everyone collectively strives to make adjustments, then maybe we'll be less likely to argue about, the border is here and you can't cross it. And it's like, we created those borders. They actually don't
mhm,
exist.
mhm.
So, we put all of this importance on nonsensical things like, okay, I'll be 5 minutes late for this interview. Is the whole world going to fall apart? Will you think less of me? I mean, maybe, maybe not. Will I still be able to make a living and pay for my kids' education? I hope so. And if
Yeah.
that doesn't happen, then we could. So I look at this as a much bigger, it lends itself to doing a bit more self-reflection, I think.
Mm,
Sorry, I know that was a massive
no.
tangent, but
No, look, one of the great things about this podcast is I get to talk to people who are in the space industry, and maybe it's my personality, but I've found a lot of people who are not the classic space person you would expect when you think someone that works for NASA or for whatever. I work in the space industry. You think, the NASA jacket, the pocket,
right.
the glasses, right? You think a nerd, but it's actually filled with a lot of different types of people, and so. I mean, I know for this podcast, it's changed me as a person for better. I'm aligned more on the mission of what we're trying to do here, and so that then helps me know where I've got to change the stuff that I'm doing that's not helping me accomplish that, or just
Right.
not being as good a person as I could be. So I totally relate with that. And I think there's something about space that makes you do that. Um, if you actually listen to it. There's also a lot of stories of people who have completely ruined their lives getting into the space industry, but that's a totally, it's like you never know. So,
Yeah, listen, I'm like my friends will ask me at dinner. So have you, sold anything else? Have you done it? Are you making money in this? Is this a thing to invest in? I'm like, yes, it's a thing to invest in. Aside from these couple of tickets that we were able to sell, no, there's a lot of foundational stuff that you need to be doing. But
mm,
and I'm also really fortunate that I have a job that pays the bills and keeps the lights on.
Yeah.
So I can, because I do this in addition to my full-time job,
Oh
which
yeah.
is my lifestyle and leisure company. And a lot of people are like, so you're now doing space. I'm like, well, I have four full-time jobs. I have Roman and Erica, which is my
Yeah.
lifestyle and travel business. I have SpaceVIP, which is the for-profit space company. I have Space Prize Foundation, which is the nonprofit, and I'm an Uber driver for my family.
Yep.
So that's four full-time jobs. Um, but I do it because that's what keeps me motivated, which is why I'm on a treadmill while I'm typing, talking, listening, breathing, etc. So maybe that's part of the immigrant upbringing where do more, otherwise you're worthless. But I'm working through that in therapy, so that's a whole
Yeah.
nother kind of conversation.
Yeah. I'm definitely working on it too. Uh, the especially from the male perspective, it's for me, it's like that feeling of, well, the man needs to support the whole family, which I would assume is in yours as well. It's a large family, so it's like, oh, okay, so there's this just next level of that I think in my head I have to get to.
Right.
So yeah, total workaholic, and working on it. Um,
I mean, I like it. It's not like I do. It's not
yeah,
like
you
I'm doing
get
something I don't want to
purpose maybe out of
be
it and stuff.
doing.
Yeah.
I enjoy the work, but most people would say you're not making money in the space business. You should go do something else and maybe maximize your efforts. I'm like, listen, I make a decent living doing what I do. I get to travel the world. That's
Mm, it's cool.
really exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that in the next, 3 to 8, we really get to make some drastic changes and improvements. I think when NVIDIA was like a couple of years ago, a year and a half, 2 years ago, when NVIDIA popped,
Mm,
their CEO was on Bloomberg or somewhere. He said it took us 8 years to be an overnight success,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's what people don't realize is that when we make $1 billion, being the exclusive marketing and sales teams for a lot of these space companies and being their voice, it's not because we just showed up and somebody was like, oh, here's $1 billion. We worked our
Yeah.
ass for it.
Sure.
But people are like, oh, more space, rich space asshole spending money
Mm,
on things that we don't need. You know what people forget is that we've had problems on this planet ever since the beginning of time.
hmm
But somebody got on a ship 600 years ago and sailed to what they thought was their death in the hope of discovery
Off the edge of the planet.
off the edge of the planet, right? We are effectively doing the same thing, but only in a different in a different way. They
Sure.
were going to the left or to the right. We're going up.
Yeah. Exploration. Yeah.
And that is inherent to our DNA.
Mm,
We're not going to sit around and be like, oh, this is great, this is cool. I don't know. Maybe some people like doing that and they're totally complacent.
mm,
I am not, and a lot of the people that I fraternize with are not. They're constantly looking for the next evolution of themselves, and that's who we are. It's like they said in Contact, the Jodie Foster movie.
mm.
We are meant to be a spacefaring species because it's preposterous to think that on this in this universe of universes, we're the only planet with any sentient
Yeah.
or intelligent beings. I mean, it's absurd. Somebody said to me, some guy who owned a restaurant in New York City said, if you believe in technology, you don't believe in God. I was like, dude, those don't need to be like mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a lot of people with a lot of sayings these days.
Yeah,
It
we're full
feels
of
it
shit.
feels like my childhood.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Spray some Windex on it.
exactly. Um, let's go into like all of the different ways that you can do space tourism or like what would you call it? Do you call it space tourism? I see in kind of some of the writing and some of the interviews I've seen, you kind of like talk about it being an astronaut and doing the same things that astronauts do, depending on the amount of training that you want to do. It seems like that's kind of one of the levers there.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of what your budget is and what you want to achieve.
Sure. So what
Um,
at the bottom, what's the most accessible thing?
I think a zero gravity flight or an analog mission is accessible. They're, in the $10,000
Okay.
range. Analog mission could be a couple of days. What is that? 4 to 7, depending where you go. A zero gravity flight is $10,000 for half a day. You can do centrifuge or simulation training in NASTAR, and
Mm.
that also 5, 8, $10,000 range. That'll give you a little bit of a taste.
And that's like the training for like orbital astronauts, so they can get used to
No, no, no.
launch. Or
Yes.
okay,
Simulation and centrifuge.
yeah.
Centrifuge replicates G forces that you'll experience at launch, and that gives you a little bit of a taste. And then it depends on what your budget is, because then you could charter out the whole zero gravity plane and be doing experiments on it, or Superman across the fuselage, like I
Right.
did.
Well,
Uh, a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do, Alex. Um,
it was your time and you spent it how you wanted to.
that's right. I
Yeah.
mean, so the interesting thing about the zero gravity flight is it's about an hour long, right? And you're flying all
Okay.
these parabolas. So the
Yeah. Doing
for
this.
most of it, yes, for most of it, you're doing dumb shit like the Superman or doing flips.
Hmm.
But the moment of clarity came towards the end, when you just got exhausted of doing all of this stuff,
Mm.
and I was laying on the floor
Oh,
when we
interesting
were
that you have
dipping
enough
down.
time to do that. Yeah.
And on the last one, all I did was push off with 2 fingers. And then you started floating. And I'm like, oh, this is what it's about.
Yeah.
And I think that's really meaningful. And imagine if you had that for a longer period of time. So I would start in any combination of those, depending on what your fancy is. I'd probably do a zero gravity flight first.
Okay.
Then, if I had more of an appetite for what they actually experience, I would do centrifuge and simulation
Okay.
training for the launches. I would probably, it's really unfortunate that there's this massive war going on between Russia and Ukraine, because
Hmm.
Roscosmos in Star City had the most amazing pool facilities where
Mm.
you can do a lot of the astronaut training, and visiting those facilities was just extraordinary. Because if you talk to like Greg Olson, who was one of the first guys, the private guys to go to space, he's like, yeah, it was crazy, training with or Richard Garriott,
Hmm.
who talk about training with the Russians and training in Russia.
Lori
By the
Garver.
way, who was that?
Lori Garver.
Uh, Not familiar with
Oh,
him
okay.
personally. But training with the Russians. And by the way, the Soyuz rockets are still operating. It's not new and shiny, but it works. Goes
Yeah.
up, goes down, which
It
is
does.
more than I can say for Boeing, for example. Too soon? Too soon for that?
Oh no, no.
Not.
That was frustrating over here as
Yeah,
well. So
yeah.
yeah.
Um, I think the stratospheric balloons are really low barrier to entry for space tourism
Mm.
when they start flying.
Mm.
I'm sure you've heard of some of the issues with some of the
No, no. Dig
operators.
into it, please.
Um, well, I think Space Perspective has hit a financial snag.
Mm.
And it'll be interesting to see how other operators can pressurize the capsules and go high up, because at 15 or 20 miles, it's important to take people to a certain height so you can see the curvature of the Earth and the
Mm.
darkness of the cosmos, because that'll be deeply impactful. I think it's really interesting to watch the single stage to orbit aircrafts that are in the process of being built, because those experiences will allow you to do 3, 5 orbits around Earth and be home in time for dinner for under
Mm.
$10 million. That's amazing.
It
And
is.
if you've got deep pockets, then you can call up, SpaceX or Axiom and say, "Hey, I got 70 million. Let me do 10 days at ISS," and
Mhm.
they'll get you up there within 18 months.
Yeah.
You also have
Which is crazy fast in the industry.
crazy fast,
Yeah.
but you need to have really deep pockets for that.
Yep.
And I'm really excited about these individual space stations that are being built and that are
Hmm.
obviously really well funded, because their timeline is really awesome. I mean, listen, Axiom also
Sure.
had financial issues where they're like, they were underfunded for a period of time. They hired too quick. So, but you have players like Vast who are coming to the game,
Yep.
and like they're well funded. We know where their money is.
Mm.
Um, so I think that's a really fascinating offering. Yes, it's a fraction of the size of the ISS, but it's still a free floating space station. So
Oh
if I
yeah.
can go do that for 70, maybe I might be more interested in doing that. So
Sure.
it really depends on what the client is trying to achieve. So when
Mm.
people come to us and they're like, "Why would I do it through you? Why can't I call the company or myself?" I'm like, "Why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah,
Email info
please
at Blue
let me know how
Origin."
it goes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell me how it goes. Because
Yeah.
I've had people say, "Oh, we've email info at Blue Origin and nobody responded." I'm like, I wonder why. So
Yeah.
I always ask the
Yeah.
question of, how do you book the Four Seasons when you go to stay? They're like, oh, I call a travel agent. I'm like, why do you call a travel agent? Well, I want the free breakfast, I want an upgrade, I want a late checkout. I'm like, the same reason that people call us is because
Hmm.
we have relationships,
Right.
we've done business with these people. So you want to do it by yourself, go ahead, I can
Yeah.
shepherd you through um, the process. So I think in the next 18 to 36 months, hopefully the stratospheric balloons will be online, and those are obviously much more affordable in the $200,000 range for a six
Mm.
hour experience. That'll activate people in a different way,
Mm.
because some people, yes, it's still for the wealthy, but let's not forget that it's the wealthy who built airplanes because they weren't worried about where their next meal was coming from. So I know
Yeah.
it's so amazing to hate rich people because let's just leave it there. But
Sure.
at the end of the day, it's the money that makes the world go around. So unless you're going out there and trying to make a difference in a meaningful way, like, be part of the solution rather than just talking shit about the problem and not
Well,
doing.
yeah, and just get way more granular in what actually bothers you, right? I don't think many people are actually digging below the surface, even be talking about it anymore.
Right.
So, it's interesting. The space economy is still being built. Like it's not really a thing. Like SpaceX has made the space economy a thing because they've just brought in so much money because they can launch so often.
Right.
But there still isn't like an actual economy for business. So like what you're doing and what so many other people are doing is not the typical way that companies can like develop because it's not a reliable like customer base. And so all that stuff is happening. We're gonna have all these moon flights very soon, starting next year, at least at the very earliest, and then Mars is in the window for the next five. And I think this is a bump in the road. A lot of people in the space industry could have argued that the Blue Origin flights could have stopped because it's probably costing them more money than they're bringing in, and their new Glenn is, they want to send the moon lander. So it's like, should they focus on that? Maybe there's an argument there,
Right.
but I think for Blue Origin, it's good because it's good data for the engine. So like as the engineer, person that wants us to get to commercial airliner status for going to space,
Right.
like, yeah, you keep flying those missions because, you want to keep getting good data so you know when it's going to fail and what you got to do for it. But as far as like interest in space, we're at this very interesting cultural point. And that's what this Blue Origin thing, it was a cultural moment, good or bad. Um,
Yeah. Zeitgeist. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like it tapped in. Is it, as someone that's trying to run whatever this company is in online and all that stuff, and would I have approached it that way? No. Like I wouldn't use those levers, but that's me and that's fine. Like the level of hype was what it was, and I think that triggered some people. I think some people that are classic space people, which is a cultural problem we've had in this industry for a while, that the Apollo astronauts, the Gemini, Mercury, like they were the best. Nothing's better than that. Like those people were offended by this as well, And so
Right.
it's this, it just really just triggered a bunch of people. But I think what we've done here is talk a lot about the different aspects of it, right? Your perspective as someone that is a person enabling this kind of thing to happen. I think it's good to get your perspective on it because it's always more complex than it ever is on, some 2 minute, 1 minute clip online.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. People need to dig deeper and ask more questions because pointing a finger and saying you're bad that's just a cop out. Like you're a coward when you do that.
Mm,
Ask more questions, reflect on yourself. What would you have done differently rather than saying, do we need any more rich people doing this sort of stuff? And I think at the end of the day, all press is good press. So maybe Blue Origin accomplished what they set out to do because, again, they operate by their own
yeah.
rubric. They don't share pricing and they don't
Yep.
care, and it's clearly working for them. And great.
Yeah.
So let's find ways to be supportive. But what I find ironic and highly amusing is when people are talking shit about Elon or Bezos or Branson on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, and tweeting and twatting, they forget for a moment that they're using technology that was
Yeah.
brought to them by space to voice their opinion. Like
The irony is great.
the irony is great, but it's seldom considered, which I find to be problematic. Like
Oh, it's annoying.
you want to be real about it, then don't do any of the stuff that was brought to you by space, and then be real. It's like when people say, a perfect example. I saw something online, and this is not a statement on how I feel politically. Um, they interviewed. I just found it to be perfectly appropriate. So they
Mm,
interview a woman on the street about the migrant issue in the United States, and she's like, yes, they need to be supported and they need to be housed. And they're like, great. And a bus pulls up and all of these migrants come out and they're like, please house them. And she runs away and shuts her door.
yeah.
So that's like a
Yeah.
great example of how fake people are.
Mm.
And that's really unfortunate. So yes, I do think that people need to be focused and a bit more granular when they're complaining about something, and really engage in a meaningful way.
Yeah. No, totally. And taking that own medicine myself, because I believe in that a lot these days. I really don't want to talk about politics unless we're actually going to do something about it. And most of the
Right.
time, we just want a 1984, 5 minutes of hate, kind of situation. So what I did for this one was I reached out to Aisha, I reached out to Amanda because I felt like those two, their
Yep.
stories were the ones that should have been told, and so that's where I want to focus. I heard from Aisha's team. Fingers crossed we get to speak with her, and that'll be awesome. I relate with her because, like her, I went to school for aerospace engineering. The students that I related the most to were the women in that, and I know many of them that uh, kicked ass and moved on to the next stage, and they're doing amazing stuff. They've done amazing stuff at Blue Origin, at SpaceX. Like it's truly they're some of the smartest people I ever knew, and they were willing to share their information. So,
Right.
but that's who I related to because I did not get along with the classic old school, old space people. Um, I
Well, they
just
talk at you, I
they
feel
talk
like. And
at you and they think they're above you and they just want it done a very specific way. And whatever, like that's fine. If you're focused on actually doing progress, then you're looking at all of the options, not the ones that you wish you had,
right,
and you make the best with what you did. That's what the space program did, is they made the best with what they had. Could they have created an amazing piece of technology that was perfect or was more eco-friendly? Sure, but they went with stuff that worked, stuff that always relit. So they
right.
did not have to worry about an issue in flight. They used test pilots because they were only the only people skilled enough and crazy enough
To do that.
to test it out. And so like for me it's like I want to talk to Aisha definitely and just hear her perspective because even on that mission, if there's anyone that, and I think she's the only one that did actual work in space, but like that's the story that could be told from the I'm a space purist perspective, right? I
Right.
love NASA. Like you could have fought for someone like Aisha who's doing fluid experiments in space to develop more research for this. Like it's just it's
Yeah, I
unfortunate,
think
but it
I
is what it
think
is.
I think they're the issue with the space folks is that because they're so smart, I mean, like the engineers and the people who've assumed senior positions,
Mm,
they're so smart in their respective field that when you try to say, listen, don't spend an hour telling me that you want to build cell phone towers in space, just tell me you want to build cell phone towers in space and speak a language that I can understand.
mm,
So they become, to your point, they speak in a condescending tone, so they can't communicate with the public. They can't communicate with investors who they need to continue for the continuity of their company. And then they come off as this really insular, impenetrable community where they're
mm,
just lauding one another for, the white papers that they've written and how amazing they are.
yeah,
And you're like, you know what? It's that's great, but you need to explain this to the public so they care, so
yeah.
you have public support, and then we'll raise money, and then we'll be able to utilize your new discovery to build a new rocket that could withstand temperatures, and that's how we can build a
Hmm.
single stage to orbit vehicle, for example.
Yeah, well, it needs
uh,
storytellers, right? Those same people that
you
are going to be
need
the
you need
critical
this.
thinkers
Yes.
and the people in the muck of it all. Like they they don't have to be, and most of the time they don't have the capabilities to also be a very good storyteller. So
Right.
it's
Right.
people like us and others that that's what it falls on. So, I think we did that here today. We were on tilt, but that's okay. It's an on tilt world right now.
Praise be, as they say in Handmaid's Tale.
Yep. Well, Roman, dude, thank you so much for coming on. I've gotta jump off here, but thank you so much for coming on
You
and
as
sharing
well,
your
Alex.
perspective. Yeah.
Thanks for
Tell
having
us
me.
absolutely. Where can people find you and learn more about what you're doing?
They could email me. I'm not some big fancy CEO. You could just reach us at spacevip.com or spaceprize.org, and we'll be happy to engage and support and chat.
Awesome. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us. Be well, stay curious, and keep spreading love and spreading science. See
Stay
you in the next
curious.
episode.
Thanks a lot. Take it
See ya.
easy.